0615, July 30th, 1943. 40 feet behind the cockpit, a man sits in a coffin made of aluminum, 4 feet wide, 5 feet long, and at 25,000 feet, 60 degrees below zero. The fuselage groans, metal expanding and contracting, breathing like something alive, something dying. Frost crawls across the plexiglass, delicate crystals forming patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't forming between you and a sky full of German fighters. Every exhale becomes a white cloud that freezes before it leaves your lips. Every inhale burns like swallowing broken glass. This is the tail gunner's office. No co-pilot beside you, no navigator to share the silence. Just 40 feet of hollow aluminum tube separating you from any human help. And that distance might as well be 40 miles. The distant drone of the Merlin engines bleeds through the airframe, but back here, in this frozen bubble of plexiglass and twin 50 calibers, that drone fades into something worse. Isolation. Complete and suffocating. The Army Air Force kept statistics, cold numbers in cold filing cabinets. And those numbers said this: tail gunners died faster than almost any other crew position. Only ball turret gunners had it worse. The average bomber crew in 1943 survived 11 missions. 11. Most tail gunners never made it that far. So why would anyone sit back here? Because Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth had figured out something the entire United States Army Air Force had missed. If stories like this are why you're here, the forgotten tactics, the men who broke the rules and survived, hit subscribe. Somewhere in Texas, in a clean, air-conditioned classroom, an Army instructor stands at a chalkboard. His voice is calm, measured. He taps a diagram of a B-17 and explains the 300-yard rule. Wait until the fighter is 300 yards away, then fire. This was doctrine. This was the official gunnery manual of the United States Army Air Forces. Conserve your ammunition. Don't waste rounds on distant targets. Wait for the sure shot. It sounded logical in Texas. It was a death sentence over Germany. Here's what that classroom never taught. A German Focke-Wulf 190, diving from 12 o'clock high, closes at 600 miles per hour. 600. At that speed, the math becomes murder. A fighter, starting its attack run at 600 yards, reaches the bomber in less than 2 seconds. If you wait until 300 yards, like the manual says, you have less than 1 second to aim, fire, and pray. 1 second. But the German pilot? He's been firing since 600 yards. His cannons are already tearing through aluminum, while the American gunner is still waiting for permission from a training manual written by men who had never seen combat. The Luftwaffe didn't just know American tactics. They studied them. They memorized them. German intelligence translated the USAAF gunnery manuals, and Luftwaffe squadron leaders used them like roadmaps. They knew exactly when American gunners would fire. They knew exactly how much lead time they had. They knew the 300-yard rule gave them a clean, uncontested approach for the most critical 600 yards of their attack. And they exploited it, mercilessly. Month after month, the same pattern. Fighters diving from the sun, gunners waiting, bombers burning. The men who followed the manual died following the manual. The statistics piled up in headquarters. Loss rates, casualty figures, bombers that never came home. But the doctrine never changed. Because changing doctrine meant admitting the doctrine was wrong. And institutions don't admit mistakes. They bury them. Every bomber crew followed the manual. Every bomber crew died. except one man decided the manual was the real enemy. Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth didn't look like a revolutionary. He wasn't a West Point tactician. He wasn't an engineering prodigy from MIT. He was a tail gunner, a man whose job description was essentially sit in a freezing metal box and try not to die. But Arooth had something the generals didn't. He had a view from the back of the plane. And from that view, he watched men die. Mission after mission, the same way, every time. Fighters diving from 6 o'clock, gunners waiting, bombers burning. And one day, sitting in that frozen coffin, he asked a question no one in Washington had bothered to ask. What if the manual is wrong? Not partially wrong, completely wrong. The regulation said 300 yards. Aruth decided on 800. 800 yards, nearly triple the distance. At that range, hitting a fighter was almost impossible, and Aruth knew it. But hitting wasn't the point. Not at first. Here's what he understood that the doctrine writers missed. A German pilot isn't a machine. He's a man with eyes. And when a man sees tracers, bright orange streaks of fire, streaming toward his cockpit from 800 yards out, something primal happens. He flinches. He banks. He breaks off his attack run to reposition. And in that moment, his perfect firing solution, the one he'd practiced 100 times, the one that had killed 100 American bombers, collapses. Aruth called it ranging fire. The first bursts weren't meant to kill. They were meant to find the target, to walk the tracers onto the fighter's flight path. Every fifth round was a tracer, and those glowing lines became a targeting system in themselves. Fire, watch, adjust, fire again. By the time the fighter closed to 600 yards, Aruth wasn't guessing anymore. He was waiting. But there was a problem. The standard issue N6 reflex gunsight, the sleek, factory-built optic bolted to every tail gun position in the 8th Air Force, wasn't designed for 800 yards. It was calibrated for close-range engagements, for the 300-yard rule. At extreme distances, calculating the lead, how far ahead of a moving target you need to aim, became nearly impossible. So Aruth built his own. He called it the junkyard gunsight, and it looked exactly like that name sounds. Bent wire, scrap aluminum, pieces of metal scavenged from the maintenance bay. It was ugly, crude, something a training officer would have confiscated on sight. And it worked. The improvised sight gave Aruth a wider field of view and better reference points for calculating lead at long range. Where the N6 failed, the junkyard gunsight compensated. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't regulation. But in the frozen tail of a B-17, elegance meant nothing. Survival meant everything. Word spread. Other gunners in the 379th Bombardment Group, the Triangle K, started watching Aruth, started asking questions, started building their own junkyard sites. And something strange began to happen. The 379th stopped dying as fast. Luftwaffe pilots, conditioned to easy kills from the 6 o'clock position, suddenly found themselves under fire before they'd even begun their attack runs. Their coordinated assaults, practiced, refined, deadly, fell apart. Fighters broke formation. Attack patterns collapsed. The psychological edge that had made the tail approach so lethal was gone. The 379th would go on to become the most successful bomb group in the entire 8th Air Force. More missions, more bombs on target, more men who came home. And it started with a heretic. A man who looked at the official doctrine, saw the bodies it had created, and decided the real enemy wasn't the Luftwaffe, It was the manual. The theory was sound. The gunsight was ready. On July 30th, 1943, over Kassel, Germany, Michael Arooth would find out if heresy could save a bomber. The B-17 Tondileo crosses into German airspace at 25,000 feet. Below, the industrial sprawl of Kassel waits. Factories, rail yards, targets. But the targets can wait. Because 47 minutes from now, the only thing that will matter is whether the men inside this aircraft are still alive. The first Messerschmitt appears at 8 o'clock high. A black dot against the pale morning sky, dropping fast, angling toward the tail. This is the classic Luftwaffe approach, the one that has killed hundreds of American bombers, the one the training manual was designed to counter, the one that hasn't worked against Michael Arooth. At 800 yards, Aruth opens fire. The twin .50 calibers roar to life, their hammering so loud in the enclosed tail compartment that it drowns out thought itself. Brass casings eject in golden streams, clattering against the metal walls, piling ankle-deep on the frozen floor. The first bursts miss wide, intentionally. Aruth watches the tracers arc through the thin air, orange lines painting the sky, and adjusts. Walks the fire left, closer, closer. At 600 yards, the tracers find the Messerschmitt's engine cowling. The German pilot sees them, bright streaks converging on his cockpit, and something in him, training, instinct, fear, forces his hand. He brakes hard right, rolling into a dive, his perfect attack run collapsing into a desperate spiral. Within seconds, he vanishes into the clouds below. He hasn't fired a single round. Aruth doesn't celebrate. There's no time. The second fighter comes low, a Focke-Wulf 190 slipping beneath the B-17's belly, trying to exploit the blind spot under the tail guns. Smart. Practiced. Exactly what the Luftwaffe has been teaching for months. But Aruth sees him. He depresses the guns to their mechanical limit, forcing the barrels down until metal scrapes against metal. The angle is impossible. The shot is almost vertical. It doesn't matter. The tracers streak downward, and the Focke-Wulf pilot, watching fire pour toward him from a position that should be defenseless, flinches. His cannon shells release early, tearing through empty air beneath the bomber's wing. The attack fails. The fighter banks away. 2 engagements, 2 disrupted attacks, 0 damage to Tondileo. Then comes the third, a Messerschmitt 109. No tricks this time, no diving approach, no low-angle ambush. This one comes straight and level. 6 o'clock, dead astern. The textbook killing position. And he doesn't break. Maybe this pilot has seen the long-range tracers before. Maybe he's decided to call the bluff, to fly through the fire and press the attack. Whatever his reasoning, he holds course. Steady, unwavering. Aruth holds the triggers. 1 second, 2, 3. The .50 calibers scream, barrels glowing red in the frozen air, heat rippling from metal that was ice cold moments ago. 4 seconds. 5. 6 continuous seconds of sustained fire. 100 rounds pour into the approaching fighter, punching through aluminum, shredding control surfaces, finding the fuel lines behind the engine. The Messerschmitt doesn't break. It disintegrates. The wing shears first. Then the fuselage crumples, folding inward as fire blooms from the engine compartment. For a single heartbeat, there is silence. The strange, terrible silence of watching a machine become a coffin. Then the fighter spins, trailing smoke, falling toward the German countryside 25,000 feet below. Aruth doesn't see it hit because something tears through the plexiglass behind him. 20-millimeter cannon fragments. From where, he doesn't know. Another fighter, a lucky shot, the chaos of a 47-minute running battle. The shrapnel rips through his arm and shoulder, and suddenly the tail compartment smells different. Cordite and burning oil and something metallic. Blood. His blood. It pools on the floor and freezes almost instantly, red turning to black on the sub-zero metal. His left arm hangs useless, shredded muscle refusing to respond. The pain is overwhelming, and then, strangely, distant. Shock. The body's final mercy. But the fighters keep coming, and the Aruth keeps firing, one-handed now, reloading with numb fingers that can barely grip the ammunition belts. Every burst is agony. Every trigger pull sends fire through what remains of his shoulder. He doesn't stop. He can't stop, because the moment he stops, the next Messerschmitt won't flinch. By the time Tondileo crosses back into Allied airspace, Michael Arooth has multiple confirmed kills. His arm will never fully recover. His tactics, the heresy, the junkyard gunsight, the 800-yard rule, have been validated in blood. But weeks later, the ground crew would find something in Tondileo's fuel tanks that Aruth couldn't explain, and historians are still arguing about it today. Before we get to what they found in those fuel tanks, and trust me, this part changes everything, make sure you're subscribed. This channel exists to dig up the stories that history tried to bury. Weeks after Kassel, a ground crew at Kim Bolton was conducting routine maintenance on Tondileo. Fuel system inspection. Standard procedure for a bomber that had taken fire. What they found was not standard. 11 shells, 20-millimeter cannon rounds lodged inside the fuel tanks. Any one of them should have detonated on impact. Any one of them should have turned Tondileo into a fireball over Germany. 11 times, Michael Arooth should have died. But the shells hadn't exploded. The armorers cracked one open, expecting to find a mechanical defect, a faulty primer, a manufacturing error. Instead, they found nothing. The shell was empty. Clean as a whistle, one man later wrote. No powder, no explosive, just hollow metal that had punched through the fuel tank like a fist through paper and done absolutely nothing. And inside one of those hollow shells, folded tight, was a scrap of paper, a note, handwritten, in Czech. This is all we can do for you now. Somewhere in occupied Czechoslovakia, in a munitions factory run by the Reich, a slave laborer had made a choice. A man or woman, we will never know their name, never see their face, had looked at the shells they were forced to build and decided to commit an act of sabotage punishable by death. They emptied the powder. They slipped in a message. And they sent that message into the sky, hoping it might reach someone who would understand. They never knew if it worked. They never knew if the bomber they saved made it home. They only knew that this was all they could do. This story comes from Elmer Bendiner's memoir, The Fall of Fortresses. Some historians find it difficult to verify. One called it strange credulity. But it appears in multiple unit histories, multiple first-hand accounts, multiple memoirs from men who were there. Whether every detail is perfect, the truth beneath it is undeniable. Resistance happened in the smallest places, by the smallest hands, in ways that will never be fully recorded. Michael Arooth flew home that day because of his tactics, because of his junkyard gunsight, because of his refusal to die by the book. But he also flew home because a stranger, 1,000 miles away, decided to fight back with the only weapon they had. Arooth finished the war with 17 confirmed kills, possibly 19. The first American ace gunner of World War II. His 800-yard technique, once heresy, became official USAAF policy after a review across 14 bomber groups. By November 1943, the Arooth Technique was in the training manuals, the same manuals that had almost killed him. Bomber losses declined. More men came home. The secret weapon was never just one man's trick. It was the synthesis of individual brilliance and the silent courage of strangers who would never meet. A tail gunner and a saboteur, connected by 11 hollow shells and a scrap of paper frozen in a fuel tank.